Hey there, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. In this lesson, we're going to create a table view with editable cells. So in every other lesson in which we use a table view, all we really do is use the default table view cell and display some data, right? But in this lesson, we're actually going to create a custom table view cell or a subclass of UI table view cell, and instead of using the default text labels or image views or what have you, we're going to actually create a text field and add it as a subview to the cell and allow the user to actually edit the contents of the cell. So of course, let's go to Xcode and create our new project. We'll choose window based. We'll call this Editable Table View. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to actually nest our table view in a navigation controller. We're not going to actually be pushing on any other view controllers, but we want to do this so that we can add an edit button in the navigation bar so that when the user presses this, it actually makes the contents of the cells editable. So by default, the contents of the cells will not be editable. They'll be locked in a way, so to speak, and then pressing the edit button will make them editable, and the user can change it and then press done when they're done editing. So let's open mainwindow.zib to get started. And so let's put this navigation controller in the instances window here. Now we need to add this as a subview to the window. So let's go to the appdelegate.h file, add an outlet for the navigation controller so we can add its view as a subview to the default window. Navigation controller. Now save. Go back to interface builder, and now let's make the connection from the appdelegate instance in the instances window to the navigation controller and connect the outlet. So what we need to do now is we need to create a view controller for the table view. So what we're going to use in this lesson is we're going to use a UI table view controller, which is a subclass of view controller. And a table view controller is good in a lot of ways, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We'll look at the documentation and see some of the reasons why it's really great to use a table view controller when you're when you're putting a table view on the screen, specifically one that's editable. But just before we get into that, let's quickly add the navigation controller's view as a subview to the window. So in the application did finish launching method, window add subview navigation controller.view, and let's save. Alright, so now let's click on the classes folder and create that table view controller. Now, a table view controller is meant to be subclass, much like a view controller, that you can give your table view the data it should display in that subclass's implementation. So to create this table view controller subclass, we're going to need to click on Objective-C class, and under here we have a subclass of, and we choose table view controller. Now I want to mention that right now I'm in 3.1, I believe, actually I might even be, okay, so I'm in 3.0. In 3.1 and later, to create a table view controller subclass, you actually need to select UI view controller subclass, and there's an option here. There's two checkboxes, the first of which says subclass of UI table view controller. Right. So if you're in 3.1 or later, make sure that you take note of that. Otherwise, you're going to be here for a few minutes, really confused. So I'm on 3.0, so it's here in this drop down here if you select Objective-C class. So I'm going to create that. I'm going to call this Editable Table View Controller. Finish. Okay. So here I need to actually also create the zip file for this editable table view controller, but again in 3.1 or later that'll be done for you. Alright, so I'm going to do that now, but I suggest you upgrade so that you don't have to waste your time with this. Okay, so I need to make the files owner the editable table view controller. Right. And so the way a table view controller works is, or one of the main ideas behind a table view controller is that its view is actually just the table view that it controls. So with a UI view controller, a UI view controller controls a view, an instance of UI view, or a subclass of it. A table view controller, its view is simply the table view that belongs in it, or exists in it. So instead of creating a view here and then putting a table view in it, I'm really just going to drag a table view to the instances window, and then right click and drag from files onto that and connect that. And so that works there. And so now the next thing we need to do is actually tell the table view to get data from and make its delegate the table view controller it exists inside of. So let's go to the connections panel here and drag from data source of the table view to files owner, and do the same for delegate. Now when you have Xcode create the zip file of a table view controller for you, it does this. And if you make an instance of a table view controller or a subclass of a table view controller using code or using the initWithStyle method and not using an interface builder file, it does all this for you. So by default, a table view controller makes its view a table view, and it makes the table view's data source and delegate itself. So this is done here, so let's close this. And one other thing to mention, or actually, let's really quickly, let's change the style of this to group. So this is what it'll look like. Just one thing to mention though is that the table view will be resized to fit inside of the view, or to fit inside of its super view, and the table view controller takes care of that. So we can save this now, and this is finished. So we have our table view controller done. So now let's take a look at editable table view controller.m. So you see here we have all these classes for us, right? Or all these methods, I mean, and so we don't have to spend a bunch of time actually typing these up. Oh, they're already here, we just need to modify them. So we've got the data source methods for our table view, number of sections in table view number of rows in section, and table view self for row at index path, and then some other optional ones like what to do when a table view selects a row at index path, and then some ones that are commented out like table view can edit row at index path, commit editing style at index path, etc. So the first thing we need to do is let's actually just put an instance of this table view controller in our navigation controller. So let's open up resources here and open up main window.zib again. And so now let's click in here in the actual view, and let's set the nib to editable table view controller and the class to editable table view controller. All right, and so let's uncomment view did load up, or it's not, yeah, up here. And let's give our table view a title. Self title equals table view. Let's save this, and then let's just take a look at where we are and build this. Okay, so as we'd hoped, we have a table view with no data. So now let's quit this and let's just give it some data really quickly. So instead of returning 0 for the number of rows, let's return 5 rows, and let's give each row some text. So self text label text equals string. Save and build again. Okay, so we've got our table view with 5 rows, each that say string. So now we have a few things to do here, but our goal is to make it so that we can allow the user to edit what it says in each row, and then when they're done editing a row, it actually saves in an array the new text, so that when they finish editing, it still says it, or when they scroll and they come back, it still says it. So let's quit this. Right. Now, one thing we want to take care of while we're here is there's a line here that if we uncomment it, self navigation item dot right bar button item equals self edit button item. Now, what this line does is it makes the UI bar button item on the right of the navigation bar for this table view controller an edit button, a button that, when pressed, sends the table view inside the table view controller into editing mode, and then when it's pressed again, it takes it out of editing mode. So I'm just going to build this here so you can see exactly what I mean. So if edit is pressed, you can see here that the table view goes into editing mode. Now, the default editing style for a cell is the delete style. You can change this to the plus sign or the add row, or you can change it to no editing style. We're going to use none. That's not to say that we're not going to allow the cell to be editable, but we don't want to show any of these controls here. We're going to take care of the editing ourselves. So what happens is this method here, SelfEdit Button item, it returns a button that's pre-configured to, when pressed, put the table view here into editing mode. So it sends a message to the table view set editing yes, animated yes. And so you can see here that when you press it, the table view goes into editing mode and it's animated into that mode. And then that button, the pre-configured button, when you press edit, it switches to say done, and it has a nice lighter blue style here that says done. And then when you press it again, it takes the table view out of editing mode by sending it a message that says table view set editing no, animated yes. All right, and so already you can see that using a table view controller definitely makes your life a little bit easier. So let's take a look at the documentation. Look up UI table view controller. Now I've already mentioned a lot of things I want to cover when looking at this, but we'll just take a look at it and quickly run through what it says here. Now, the first one I already talked about. Basically, if you use a nib file for your table view controller, basically it's your job to set it up or let Xcode set it up for you. But if not, the table view will be created automatically and be configured so that it asks the table view controller for its data. It says that in the second part here. Now, this next one says when the table view is about to appear the first time it's loaded, the table view controller reloads the table view's data. A basic thing to notice, it's not really going to have any effect. It's just saying that the table view controller tells the table view to reload its data when the table view controller's view is added on screen. And then here's the important thing that I was talking about before. It implements the superclass method set editing animated so that if a user taps an edit or done button in the navigation bar, the controller toggles the edit mode of the table view. So the table view controller takes it upon itself to change the editing mode of the table view inside of it when its own editing mode changes. So a view controller has an editing mode, any view controller, including a table view controller, which is a subclass of UI view controller. And so a table view controller implements the its own set editing animated method, in that when its editing mode changes, it tells the table view inside of it to change its editing mode to match its own editing mode. So when the table view controller is in editing mode, it tells its table view to go into editing mode, and vice versa. Now, something that's just as important, if not more important, when a table view goes into editing mode, it tells all of its cells to also go into editing mode, and we're going to basically exploit that to know when the user is trying to edit the content of the cells. So when you set a table view into editing mode, it redraws all of its cells and sets all of its cells editing property equal to yes. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started with creating our editable cell. So we need to create a subclass of UI table view cell. So now the default table view cell here is pretty basic. You can have a text label, a large black text label, a smaller one, and a gray, very small one on the bottom. You can have an image view on the left, but other than that, they're not very customizable. So when you have an idea for a cell that doesn't look anything like a default UI table view cell, you need to create your own cell and add onto it the views that you need. So in our case, we need a text field. So we need to create a subclass of UI table view cell. and add as a subview to the cell's content that text field. So let's select classes here and let's go to File, New File. And we're going to select Objective-C class, and then in the drop down here, subclass of UI table view cell. We're going to call this Editable Cell. Okay. Let's go into the .m here and create that text field. So we're going to create the text field in code. Actually, we're going to do everything in code here with this cell. And so I'm sure you know that you always want to make it so that when you create a cell that it's reusable. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create this text field in the init with frame method of our custom cell here, so that when a cell gets reused, you don't create an extra text field. So if you were to create the text field in, let's say, the implementation of table view cell for index path and add it as a subview to your cell, ultimately you would create a bunch of extra text fields, and then you would have text fields sitting on top of text fields. So in order to make it so that we can reuse this cell without creating extra text fields, we want to create that only text field inside of the init method, and this init method, init with frame reuse identifier, only gets called when you create a new cell. And so that way we ensure that we don't make extra text fields, and we make it so that we can reuse this. So let's create the text field as an instance variable, and actually a property, so that it can be accessed by the table view controller. So UI text field, right? And then let's make it a property. Read, write, retain. Although we're not actually going to be assigning a text field, we're just going to be calling to it. And then UI text field, and then we need to synthesize it. Now, if this seems like you're really confused what's going on right now, just hang in there, because by the end of the video, it's definitely all going to make sense, because you're going to see why we're taking all these. Basically, what we're doing right now is we're preparing for later on in our development here. So a lot of this is just kind of like steps we need to take to prepare for the final result. So let's create that text field. So text field equals UI text field. Now I have written down here the bounds that we want to use. Now when you do this, either you need to go in Interface Builder and you need to create a text field there inside of a cell and figure out the frame so that it looks nice, basically, so that it's not too big, not too small, in the right place. Otherwise, you basically just have to guess and check, pick some random coordinates that sound sort of close to what you're looking for, and then just adjust as you go. That's how I do it. That's how I've always liked to do it. So that's how I did it. But so I'll have them here for you. So UI text field alloc init with frame cgrect make 6, 10, 290, and 30. Right. So the first here is the x coordinate of where it begins. The second here is the y coordinate where it begins. The third parameter here is the width of it, so 290 pixels wide, and the last is the height. Oh, that's supposed to be 30. Okay, so now let's add this as a subview to the content view of this cell. So self content view. So anytime you want to add a view, a subview to your cell's content, you need to add it to the content view property of the cell. So that's where you want to be always adding your subview. So self content view add subview. So of course self here is the cell itself. So basically saying cell, take this text field and add it as a subview to yourself. Add subview text field and save. Right now, of course, we need to go back to our table view controller, and instead of using a UI table view cell, we need to use our editable cell. So we need to first import that file so we don't get any errors here. Editable cell, save. And now here, cell equals editable cell. So when we allocate it and initialize it, we're going to actually make an instance of editable cell. You can see here, we're going to return it. We're going to sort of, in a way, pretend that it's a UI table view cell when we return it. But the point here is that it doesn't actually matter, because the table view cell's job is simply to take it and then tell it to draw itself in a certain area on the screen. From there, it's the table view cell's job to actually do the drawing. So if we create a subclass of it, it'll take care of all that, and there's no, the point here basically is that the table view doesn't care, and it doesn't make a difference to the table view what kind of cell we give it, as long as it has the basic properties of a table view cell. Right? So when we create a subclass of a table view cell, we take a regular table view cell and just add more to it. So the basic foundations of a table view cell are still there. So as far as the table view is concerned, it's just a cell, so it doesn't make a difference. Now we want to actually give some text to that text field. So editable. So now we're typecasting here, because up here we declared it as a UI table view cell, so that when we return it, we trick the table view into thinking it's a table view cell, or a default UI table view cell. So now we're going to typecast. So editable cell text field text equals string. And get rid of this line here, because we don't need this anymore. And now one last thing we need to do, take a look here. When the cell is created with this method here, it uses init with style reuse identifier. But if we go back to editable-cell.m, actually here you see we did everything in an implementation of init with frame. So we need to change that there. Now, fortunately, if you create a cell with a frame containing the points 0, 0, and 0 width, 0 height, it actually has a built-in frame size. So it takes it upon itself to create a real frame that isn't 0, 0, 0, 0, because of course that's worthless. So now let's save this here, and let's build. So not much notable difference right now, right? But these actually are text fields. See, if we click on it, we can actually type something here. Now we need to make it so that this actually saves, and we have actually a few things to do here. So let's quit this. Now the first thing we want to do is let's go to the .m, and by default, let's make that text field not editable, so disabled. So text field enabled equals no. So now when the application is first launched, or when the cell is first created, the text field is not editable. We're going to make it so that when the user presses the edit button and puts the table view in editing mode, the text field will become enabled. So we'll have to program that in here. But so right now, let's do some more preparation for the final product here. Now let's go into the table view controller. And so right now we actually have just a constant string text in every text field. Let's create an array that contains the content for each text for each cell, so that when it's changed, it'll be saved at the appropriate position or for the appropriate cell. So ns mutable array, content array, save. And now when the view loads, let's actually give that array some data. So content array equals ns mutable array alloc init with objects, and let's just give it a bunch of strings that all say string. I'm going to give it enough so that it actually makes the table view larger than its bounds, so that you can see that scroll. Well, you'll be able to see what happens when the keyboard appears, and how the table view controller automatically resizes the table view to basically make room for the keyboard, in that the keyboard doesn't cover any of the table view's contents. So now let's go down here and change this line. So instead of just a constant string, we get the object at the appropriate index of the cell from the content array. So object at index index path dot row. Of course, we also need to go up here, and instead of returning a constant 5 for the number of rows, we need to make it the size of the content array. So count. Now we can save, and let's just see how that's changed things here. So now we've got this many rows, right? So let's quit this, and now let's get our cell ready to accept the editable or the edited data from the user. So we need to make the delegate of the text field the cell, so that when the cell or when the text field completes editing or finishes editing, it alerts the cell, the editable cell that it sits inside of, so that the cell can in turn tell the table view controller to update the text at the appropriate position of the array, of the content array, so that it saves the new text, the modified text. All right, so let's just really quickly here, now if we build the app, we can see that if you select the right spot outside of the text field, you can actually still select the row. So let's go here, and a table view, when it draws a cell, it actually will check with the cell to see if it has a selection style. So UI table view cell selection style, table view cell selection style, we're going to return UI table view cell selection style none. So a constant none, so that when the table view goes down all these cells, it sees here, it checks with the cell and asks. It basically does something along the lines of cell selection style, and that will return the selection style of the cell, the editable cell, and it's going to get UI table view cell selection style none, and so it will disable the user from selecting the cell all the way through. So now if we build, just to make sure that that has been corrected, if we click anywhere, we cannot select the cell like we wanted. Let's make it so that the table view or the cell has to be in editing mode for the text field to be enabled. So we've already disabled it by default. Well, let's implement this method here. Set editing, bool editing, animated, bool animated. So when the table view goes into editing mode or comes out of editing mode, it will send a message to every single one of its cells saying set editing, and then the editing mode that it's been changed to, animated, yes or no, depending on if you put animations on. So when the table view goes into editing mode, this cell is going to go into editing mode. So when the cell is in editing mode, or when it changes into editing mode, we want to enable the text field. So we're going to check. So whenever the editing mode changes, whether from yes to no or no to yes, this method is going to be called. So now we're going to do an if statement. If editing, or if editing equals yes, basically that's saying text field enabled equals yes. Else text field enabled equals no. Now let's build, and let's make sure that this works here. So now by default, of course, if we click here, we cannot edit the text field. Now if we click edit, and now we click, you can see that it actually is editable. Right? And now we can type whatever, and now we click done. It goes out of editing mode, and the keyboard disappears. So when we come out of editing mode here, we tell the text field to make itself not enabled, and then it automatically resigns its first responder status and hides the keyboard and makes itself not editable. So now let's quit this. We can obviously make this much simpler. I did this the first time so you could see basically the logic behind it, but now we can, in a much easier way, simply set the text field enabled equal to editing. So if editing is yes, enabled yes. If editing is no, enabled no, and I'm sure you can see why that'll work, and so I don't need to show you. Okay, so now we're almost done here. The last and probably most important thing we need to do is we need to make it so that when the text field finishes editing, it updates the text at the right position of the content array with the table view controller. So we have a few things you need to do to prepare for that. So first, let's go into editable cell.h. We need to add two properties, one for the index path of the cell, and one for containing a link or a pointer to the table view controller, so that it can send a message to the table view controller and tell the table view controller to update the content array with the new text, the edited text. So let's add class here, editable table view controller, so we don't get a warning. And let's create those two properties. So first, ns index path. We'll call this own index path. So each cell now is going to store in an instance variable or in a property its own index path inside of the table view. So basically its position in the table view. So of course the position of each cell should match directly with the position of each of the strings in the content array. And then editable table view controller. I'll save, and now let's make these both properties. So now the first one, read, write, retain, we'll use for the index path. Own index path. Now the second one though, instead of retain, can now read, write of course, but instead of retain we're going to make it assign. If we make it retain, then by the time the table view is finished drawing out all 10 or so rows, the retain count of the editable table view controller is going to be extremely high, 10 or whatever, however many rows there are. And so it's kind of silly. We don't need to do that. When you make a property type retain, when it's given a value, it takes the value and then adds 1 to its retain count or sends retain to it. Basically, it's a way to make sure that that object does not get released from memory, which could cause some crashing. So it's just a way to double check. But this is a very simple application. Nowhere in the application is the table view controller released, and so we don't have to worry about that. So we're just going to make it assigned, so it does not increase the retain count of the controller when it's assigned to its property. Editable table view controller, and then let's just synthesize these. Own index path and controller. Save, and now let's go to the implementation of self-row index path, and let's set those both. So editable cell own index path equals index path, and so of course that's grabbed from here from the parameter passed in for this self-row index path method, and so it's basically like a direct relationship here. It's one-to-one. And then editable cell controller is always going to be equal to self. So this is just a link again right back to the table view controller, so that when a user edits the contents of the text field, we can update the information with the controller's content array. We don't want to give each cell access to the content array, so we're just going to use basically a proxy methods and allow the table view controller to update the content array and give it the new string and the correct index path or the correct location of the edited string. And so we only need these two things here. So now let's create a method that will allow us to update the text. So void update text and a string. So the text, this will be the new text of the edited text of the cell at index path, ns index path. Save. And so you can imagine the implementation of this is going to be quite simple. Update in text and a string text at index path, ns index path. Content array, replace object at index path.row, because of course this is an ns index path object which contains two properties, row and section. We only have one section, so we're really dealing with the row here. So we want to grab the row, and that'll be the index of the text in the content array, and then with object text. So we're replacing the old text at this index path with the new text. And now the last thing we need to do is need to make it so that when the text field finishes editing, the cell sends a message to the table view controller and tells it to replace the old text with the new text. So we have a method here, a text field, a UI text field delegate method. Text field did end editing, and then it has one parameter here, and that's simply to pass in itself, text field. And then very simply, now we need to import, so we don't get any warnings here, the table view controller, and then controller update text field text. So this is we're accessing the text property of the text field to get that new updated text. Own index path. Let's save. Now let's give it a shot. Okay. So of course we have all these rows here. Of course we cannot edit them by default. We go into editing mode now. We can. Let's change the text here. Click done. And you can see the new text has been saved. So when you scroll a table view cell out of view and bring it back, it's redrawn. And of course that new text is saved in the content array, and so it repulls the text from that content array at index path row 0, and it has updated the object at index 0 of the content array and gives it back to the cell. And we can edit any cell we want to say anything, and it will save it for any, and we can change without clicking done. And that'll also call to the did end editing. So whenever a text field resigns its first responder status or resigns its basically activeness, then it will call to the text field did end editing method. And so we can scroll here, we see it all works. Now you can see that when we brought the keyboard up here, the table view was automatically redrawn so that this wasn't all covered here, and that really you should thank Apple for that, because in the very early stages of the SDK that was not implemented, and it was your job as a developer to basically make it so that when the keyboard shows, you redraw the table view so that none of it gets covered up and then it fits in this little smaller area here, and then when the keyboard hides, to redraw it so it takes up the whole screen. And it was kind of a pain, and it was always awkward, and it never seemed to flow nicely, and Apple has found a way to make it work very well and do it all for you. And there's a lot of instances like that where the Apple developers work very hard for these little things that might not seem like a big deal, but when you don't have to do them, they really are a big deal. And I think that basically they deserve a pat on the back for that. So so definitely appreciate what the Apple developers do for you. But anyway, so the basically what we did here was we used a table view controller, because table view controller does a lot of the work for us. It has an editing button if you set it one, and then if you press edit, it puts the table view in editing mode. Press edit again, it takes it out of it, so on and so forth. And so we created a subclass of table view cell, added the text field, and then added that as a content view. Now you can add anything as a subclass, a subview to the cell's content view. You can add labels, buttons, images, anything you can think of, really, any UI view or any UI view subclass. So so the sky's the limit with that, really, if you want to put it that way. But that wraps up the lesson on making cells have editable content. I'm Anthony from iCodeTeacher.com. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune into future lessons. And thank you so much for watching.